In southeast Kansas, an archaeological dig is underway to uncover new clues in a century-old murder mystery.
Grisly murder mystery was discovered 150 years ago. Chances are, if you've taken a road trip from Wichita to Pittsburgh, you've driven right past it.
In October 1870, the Bender family settled in Osage Township, Labette County, Kansas, a location that would soon become infamous. They were among 5 spiritualist families who claimed land in the area, with John Bender Sr. and his son, John Bender Jr., staking out 160 acres along the Great Osage Trail. This trail was a crucial route for pioneers heading west, making the Benders' land a prime spot for travelers. By the fall of the next year, the Benders had established a modest homestead, including a cabin, barn, corral, and well. Elvira Bender and her daughter Kate joined them, completing the family. The cabin was divided into 2 rooms by canvas wagon cover. The rear served as living quarters, while the front was a makeshift general store where they sold dry goods and offered meals and lodging to passers-by. The store's exterior was marked by a crudely written sign reading Grocery, reflecting the family's limited command of English. The Benders were an unusual bunch. John Bender Sr., around 60 years old, spoke little English, and when he did, his speech was often unintelligible. He was a gruff, intimidating figure. His wife, Elvira, was no less forbidding. At 55, she was known for her unfriendly demeanor, earning the nickname She-Devil among those who knew her. John Bender Jr., in contrast, was a handsome young man of about 25, with auburn hair and a mustache. He spoke English fluently, albeit with a German accent, but his tendency to laugh aimlessly led many to consider him a half-wit. The most captivating of the family was Kate Bender, a 23-year-old who was both attractive and articulate. She quickly gained notoriety in the area as a self-proclaimed healer and psychic, distributing flyers that touted her supernatural abilities and promises to cure illnesses. Kate also held seances and gave lectures on spiritualism, further enhancing her fame. Her advocacy for free love, a radical concept at the time, made her both scandalous and intriguing, drawing even more visitors to the Bender homestead. Despite their apparent openness, the Benders remained shrouded in mystery. They were widely believed to be German immigrants, but no definitive proof of their origins or family relationships ever surfaced. Some speculated that John Bender Sr. was actually John Flickinger and that he hailed from Germany, Norway, or the Netherlands. Elvira was rumored to be Almira Hill Mark, born in the Adirondack Mountains with a dark past that included multiple marriages and possibly the murder of several husbands. Kate was purportedly Elvira's 5th daughter, though some neighbors insisted that she and John Jr. were not siblings, but husband and wife. The Bender homestead became a well-known stop for travelers, attracted by Kate's allure and the promise of spiritual enlightenment. However, the family's dark secrets would soon be revealed as travelers began to disappear, leading to the eventual discovery of their gruesome crimes. The Benders' legacy is not one of hospitality and healing, but of cold-blooded murder and the chilling legend that followed. It is believed that the Bender family had a chilling method for murdering their unsuspecting guests at their Kansas inn. When a guest arrived, they would be given a seat of honor at the dining table, strategically placed over a trap door leading to the cellar. With the guests' back to a curtain, Kate Bender would engage them in conversation while John Bender or his son would stealthily emerge from behind the curtain and strike the guest on the right side of the skull with a hammer. To ensure the victim's death, one of the Bender women would then slit their throat. The body would be dropped through the trap door, stripped of any valuables, and later buried somewhere on the property, often in the orchard. Although some of the victims were wealthy, others carried little value, leading to speculation that the Benders sometimes killed purely for the thrill of it. Several survivors later testified about their harrowing escapes from the Bender Inn, offering chilling insights into the family's murderous routine. William Pickering, for instance, became suspicious when he noticed stains on the wagon cloth behind him and refused to sit near it. Kate Bender reacted angrily and threatened him with a knife, prompting Pickering to flee the scene. Another account came from a Catholic priest, Father Paul Ponsiglione, who claimed to have seen one of the Bender men concealing a large hammer. Feeling uneasy, he quickly made an excuse to leave, saying he needed to check on his horse. The Benders were also known to sell stolen goods, including horses, saddles, and clothing, often explaining that their previous owners had been unable to pay for their stay and had left these items behind. In one instance, a woman named Mrs. Fitz sensed something was wrong during dinner when she noticed a movement behind the canvas. Kate Bender issued a command, but Fitz, gripped by fear, fled before anything could happen. Another close call involved two men who came to the inn to experience Kate Bender's psychic abilities. They refused to sit near the suspicious clothes and instead ate their meal at the shop counter. Kate grew hostile, and shortly afterward, the Bender men emerged from behind the curtain. Sensing danger, the men quickly left, a decision that likely saved their lives. Later, investigators found more than a dozen bullet holes in the cabin's roof and walls, suggesting that some victims had tried to fight back after being attacked with the hammer. In May 1871, the grisly discovery of a man named Jones with a crushed skull and slit throat in Drum Creek sent shockwaves through Labette County, Kansas. The crime remained unsolved, but it was only the beginning of a horrifying series of disappearances that would cast a dark shadow over the region. In February next year, 2 more bodies were found with identical injuries, but still no action was taken. By 1873, the area had become notorious for its lawlessness, a breeding ground for horse thieves and villains. Travelers, wary of the mounting tales of missing persons, began avoiding the Osage Trail, the lifeline that cut through the county. Moreover, the winter of 1872 had brought a new tragedy when George Newton Longcore left Independence, Kansas, with his infant daughter, Mary Ann, intending to start a new life in Iowa. They were never seen again. The following spring, Dr. William Henry York, a neighbor and friend of Longcore, embarked on a journey to find them. His search led him through the rugged and perilous landscape, questioning homesteaders along the trail. On March 9, 1873, after reaching Fort Scott, Dr. York began his return to Independence but vanished without a trace. Dr. York's disappearance did not go unnoticed. He had 2 brothers, Ed York, who lived in Fort Scott, and Colonel Alexander M. York, a battle-hardened Civil War veteran, lawyer, and Kansas state senator. When William failed to return home, his brothers sprang into action, determined to find him. Colonel York, leading a posse of 50 men, scoured the trail, questioning everyone they encountered and visiting every homestead in the area. On March 28, 1873, the search brought Colonel York and a companion named Mr. Johnson to the Bender family's modest inn. York explained that his brother had gone missing and asked if they had seen him. The Benders admitted that Dr. York had indeed stayed with them, but suggested that he may have run into trouble with Indians. Colonel York, cautious but suspecting foul play, agreed that it was a possibility and stayed for dinner. The visit haunted Colonel York, who returned to the inn on April 3rd, this time with armed men, after hearing that a woman had fled the Benders' inn when Elvira Bender had threatened her with knives. When confronted, Elvira pretended not to understand English, but when York repeated the accusations, she erupted in a fit of rage. She declared that the woman was a witch who had cursed her coffee, revealing her surprisingly good command of English. Before York and his men left, Kate Bender, the family's alluring and mysterious daughter, invited him to return alone on Friday night, promising to use her clairvoyant powers to help find his brother. Suspicious but lacking concrete evidence, York decided to bide his time. As tensions rose, accusations began to fly, with some locals blaming the nearby Osage community for the disappearances. A township meeting was convened at Harmony Grove Schoolhouse, drawing 75 concerned citizens, including Colonel York and possibly both John Bender and his son. They resolved to obtain a warrant to search every homestead between Big Hill Creek and Drum Creek. But despite York's suspicions, no one kept watch on the Benders. It wasn't until several days later that their flight was noticed. 3 days after the township meeting, a man named Billy Toll was herding cattle past the Bender property when he noticed that the inn appeared abandoned and the farm animals were left unfed. patrol reported this to the township trustee, but bad weather delayed the investigation. When the search party, which included Colonel York, finally arrived at the Bender Inn, they found the place eerily deserted. The cabin was stripped of food, clothing, and personal belongings, but a foul odor emanated from within. The stench led the searchers to a trap door beneath a bed, nailed shut. When they pried it open, they found themselves peering into a cellar floor soaked with clotted blood. The space below, 6 feet deep and 7 feet square at the top, narrowed to just 3 feet at the bottom. Despite breaking through the stone slab floor with sledgehammers, no bodies were found, only the sickening stench of blood-soaked earth. Undeterred, the men physically moved the cabin to dig beneath it, but still found nothing. The search continued outside, where they probed the ground with metal rods, especially around the disturbed soil of the vegetable garden and orchard. That evening, they uncovered the body of Dr. York, buried face down with his feet barely beneath the surface. By midnight, another 9 potential grave sites were identified, and by morning, 8 more bodies had been unearthed, along with several body parts found in a well. All but one victim had been bludgeoned with a hammer and had their throats cut. The only exception was the body of a young girl who had no visible injuries. It was speculated that she had either been strangled or, in a final act of cruelty, buried alive. As word of the gruesome discoveries spread, a crowd of more than 3,000 people, including journalists from as far as New York City and Chicago, descended upon the site. The Bender cabin was ransacked by souvenir hunters, who took everything, even the bricks that lined the cellar and the stones from the well. Kansas State Senator Alexander York offered a $1,000 reward for the arrest of the Benders, a sum that was doubled by Kansas Governor Thomas A. Osborne on May 17, 1873. Despite the rewards and the nationwide manhunt that followed, the Benders had vanished, leaving behind a legacy of terror that would haunt Kansas for years to come. The notorious Bender family's escape from justice was as chilling as their crimes. Detectives, hot on their trail, followed the wagon tracks left by the Benders until they found their wagon abandoned just outside Thayer, Kansas, a mere 12 miles from their blood-soaked inn. The team of horses was found starving, and one mare was lame, a silent testament to the haste of the Benders' flight. It was soon discovered that the family had purchased tickets on the Leavenworth, Lawrence and Galveston Railroad, heading for Humboldt, but their cunning escape was far from over. At Chanute, John Jr. and the enigmatic Kate Bender separated from the elder Benders. They boarded the MK and T train, heading south towards Red River County, near the Texas border. Their ultimate destination was believed to be an outlaw colony on the Texas-New Mexico border, a place so lawless that even the most determined lawmen dared not follow, as few who ventured there ever returned. One detective claimed to have tracked John Jr. and Kate to this outlaw haven, where he learned that John Jr. had succumbed to apoplexy. As for the elder Benders, they continued their journey north, traveling to Kansas City before vanishing into the bustling anonymity of St. Louis, Missouri. Despite their efforts to elude capture, the legend of the Benders grew, with countless stories emerging of vigilante groups who claimed to have caught up with the murderous clan. One group boasted of shooting all the Benders, except for Kate, who they allegedly burned alive. Another claimed to have lynched the family and thrown their bodies into the Verdigris River. Yet another tale described a dramatic gunfight where the Benders were slain and buried on the prairie. Despite these stories, no one ever claimed the substantial $3,000 reward offered for their capture. The search for the Benders became an obsession spanning decades. For 50 years, authorities and vigilantes alike pursued every lead, fueled by the fear that the killers were still at large. 2 women traveling together were often accused of being Kate Bender and her mother, as the ghostly shadow of the Bender family loomed large over the American landscape. In 1884, the mystery deepened when a man named John Flickinger reportedly committed suicide by drowning himself in Lake Michigan. That same year, an elderly man matching the description of John Bender Sr. was arrested in Montana for a brutal hammer murder near Salmon, Idaho. The authorities in Kansas were notified, but before positive identification could be made, the suspect severed his foot to escape his leg irons and bled to death. By the time a deputy from Cherryvale arrived, the body had decomposed beyond recognition. Despite this, the man's skull was displayed in a local saloon, touted as the remains of Pa Bender, until the onset of Prohibition in 1920, when the gruesome artifact mysteriously disappeared. The legacy of the Benders' crimes ensnared others as well. Weeks after the bodies were discovered on their property, Addison Roach and his son-in-law, William Buxton, were arrested as accessories. Along with them, 12 men of questionable character were apprehended, including a man named Brockman, who had been implicated in disposing of the stolen goods. Brockman's dark past caught up with him again 23 years later when he was arrested for the rape and murder of his 18-year-old daughter. On Halloween of 1889, a shocking development occurred when Mrs. Almira Monroe and Mrs. Sarah Eliza Davis were arrested in Niles, Michigan on charges of larceny. Although they were acquitted, they were immediately rearrested for the Bender murders after being identified by Mrs. Frances E. McCann, the daughter of one of the Bender's victims. Mrs. McCann's determination stemmed from vivid dreams of her father's murder, which she believed led her to the culprits. Local witnesses corroborated the identification, claiming the women were indeed Elvira and Kate Bender. Deputy Sheriff Leroy I. Dick, who had led the original search of the Bender property, traveled to Michigan to take custody of the women. Despite their denials and conflicting accusations against each other, they were brought back to Kansas for trial. The case was riddled with inconsistencies, and despite the affidavit from Mrs. Monroe's daughter claiming she was not Elvira Bender, the judge dismissed the charges, citing insufficient evidence and the unreliability of the witness. The trial, delayed until May 1890, ended with the woman's discharge, leaving the true fate of the Bender family shrouded in mystery. The Benders, known criminals and consummate liars, had evaded justice once again. Their legend persisted, their crimes continuing to cast a long, dark shadow over the Midwest, where every whisper of their names sent chills down the spines of those who remembered the bloody trail they left behind. In a chilling twist, a contemporary report from a Kansas City man reignited the gruesome legend of the Bender family, claiming that they had not only evaded capture, but had re-emerged as the notorious Kelly family. This unnamed man, who had thoroughly investigated the Benders' house of horrors and the swirling rumors surrounding their supposed demise, boldly declared that all stories of their capture were fabrications concocted by a group of Confederates. These sympathizers, according to the man, had aided the Benders in disposing of their victims' horses and wagons, helping them vanish into the shadows. He drew chilling parallels between the Benders and the Kellys, noting that their methods, family dynamics, and other damning pieces of evidence were eerily similar, if not identical, suggesting they were one and the same. But the terror of the Benders wasn't confined to history alone. The infamous family's dark legacy even brushed against the wholesome image of the Ingalls family, immortalized by Laura Ingalls Wilder in her ** Little House on the Prairie * series. Wilder recounted in a 1937 speech, later printed in the * Saturday Evening Post *, how her family had stopped at the Benders Inn, unaware of the horrors hidden within. She recalled the whispers of murder spreading like wildfire through their community, and how her father, Pa, joined a vigilante hunt for the killers. He would later speak of the futile searches with a haunting finality, always insisting, "They will never be found." Despite her tender age at the time, Wilder's memories cast a lingering shadow over her idyllic tales, leaving readers to wonder what horrors truly lurked behind the facade of frontier life. Some skeptics, however, argue that Wilder's account might have been colored by time, as the Ingalls family left the area 2 years before the Benders were exposed. Yet, the story remains a haunting footnote in the annals of American folklore. Now, as we move to the end of discussing those unspeakable horrors, we remember those whose lives were violently cut short by the Bender family. Mr. Jones, found in May 1871 with his skull crushed and throat cut, was just the beginning. By February 1872, the bodies of 2 unidentified men were discovered in the prairie, sharing the same brutal fate. The grim pattern continued in December 1872. Ben Brown, a man from Howard County, Kansas, vanished with $2,600. His remains were unearthed in the apple orchard that became the Benders' grim cemetery. W.F. McCrawdy, a Civil War veteran, was found with only $38 missing from his possessions. Henry Mackenzie, relocating to Independence, was taken for $36 and his prized horses. Even the innocent, like Johnny Boyle, who had merely $10 and a pacing mare, were not spared, his body cast into the Bender's well. But perhaps the most heart-wrenching loss was that of George Newton Longcore and his infant daughter, Mary Ann. Returning to Iowa after the devastating loss of his wife and son, George never reached his destination. Instead, he and Mary Ann were laid to rest in the orchard. The little girl, buried fully clothed, was thought to have been buried alive. In the end, the search for justice uncovered more than 20 victims, their remains scattered across Drum Creek, the orchard, and beyond. The discovery of the murder weapons, the hammers that crushed skulls and a knife stained with blood, serves as a chilling reminder of the evil that once resided here. But while we honor the memory of these victims forever etched in history, a somber testament to the lives lost and the darkness that touched this quiet corner of Kansas, we must remember this mystery was never truly solved. The Benders vanished into the shadows, leaving only whispers of their evil deeds. The blood-stained hammers and scattered graves still tell a chilling tale, but the true fate of the killers remains a haunting enigma, lost forever in the darkness of history.